All right, so we're on 4.2. This is page 197. So solving algebraic equations. The first thing you might want to pause this. You're definitely going to want to pause this and write this down. But if you did, and you in here, if you didn't already have it written down, you should write it down. But how to solve equations. Number one, get the variable by itself. That's the thing you always have to remember. The variable has to be by itself. If it's not by itself, you didn't solve it. That's what it means to solve an equation. Two, turn subtraction into addition of the opposite. We'll explain a little bit more about this, but you got to you're trying to get rid of those subtraction signs so that everything is addition, so you can use the commutative property to move everything around. But if you're not, don't remember that, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And then you need to undo what's being done to the variable in the opposite order. So we'll talk a little bit more about that too, but usually we think of PEMDAS, P-E-M-D-A-S. Whatever's being done first, you go and then you work your way down. That's how you figure things out. But when it comes to solving equations, you need to go in the opposite order. So addition and subtraction, if those are the last things that are happening, that's the first thing that you need to undo. So you undo what's being done to the variable, but in the opposite order that it's usually being done. And then last of all, you got to get all the variables on one side. So you got to remember that's one of the goals. These are not perfect. It's not going to work for you every single time. But they are basic kind of foundations that will help you get in the groove of this is how I solve simple equations, and then hopefully you learn some skills that you'll know how to do the harder equations. So another thing that we're going over to as a reminder, multiplication and division. Remember that when you have a positive and a positive for either multiplication or division, I'm doing multiplication here, but it's for either one. Positive makes a positive, so 2 times 10 is 20. Negative times a positive is negative, so negative 2 times 10 is negative 20. Positive times negative is negative. Positive 2 times negative 10 is negative 20. And then negative times negative is positive. So negative 2 times negative 10, positive 20. And this is a nice little reminder. You got this triangle here, and there's a negative, and a positive in there. So if you use a negative and a positive, the negative is the only thing left. If you use a negative, positive is the only thing left. If you use a negative and a positive, negative is the only thing left. So that's kind of some ways that you can remember those. But, and you can pause the video and review any of that if you need to, but that's important to have in your notes. Come on. So now we're on page 200. You can flip all the way up to 200 to look at this. But solving these equations, we've got 3 minus 7x equals 10. So if I don't know how to solve this, then I need to go back up here and say, hey, I need to get the variable by itself. Well, I don't know how to do that yet. I'm going to keep going on this. Turn subtraction into addition to the opposite. I can do that. Right here, I see subtraction. I'm going to turn it into addition of a negative 7x. So now I have 3 plus a negative 7x. I can rewrite it, 3 plus negative 7x. Maybe that'll help me remember. Then I need to say, hey, what's next? Undo what's being done to the variable in the opposite order. All right, well, this is x. The first thing that's happened to x is you're multiplying by negative 7. The next thing is you're adding 3. So I have to undo it in the opposite order. What was the last thing I did to it? I added 3. So what's the first thing I undo? I subtract 3. That gets rid of this. Now I have negative 7x left equals 7. It's pretty easy to figure out what x is at this point. But I have to, just for the sake of making sure we're going through these, and yes, I want you to show your work on all of these just like I am. Don't say, hey, I can look at that and just figure out what it is. These are simple. If you don't show your work on the simple ones, you will not know how to do the more challenging ones. Divide by negative 7. X equals, I have a positive divided by negative. That makes it a negative. 7 divided by 7 is 1, so I know my answer. X equals negative 1. And look, I even got all the variable by itself. And there's the x's are already on one side. I didn't have to worry about that. If I look at the next one, oh, I should also mention you can see that on page 200, but you can put that x equals negative 1 back into the original equation and look it out. It will always work out if you put that negative 1 back in, you should get the same answer out. If you don't do it, it means you did something wrong. So you should never have one where you're like, well, I didn't know if I got it right. If you don't check it, then you can't be sad when you don't get it, because that's how you can actually figure it out. B on page 200 is 1/6 y. Remember, that's 1/6 times y. That multiplication is implied. Minus 1/3 equals 2. So again, I look at this. What's the first thing that pops up? Those things. Look at them. Which one? What's the first thing that I have to do out of those ones that I said earlier? Yeah.
The negative.
What about the negative?
Sorry, it would be a negative because you have to change it to addition.
Yeah. So you change it to addition. So now I've got 1/6 y plus a negative 1/3 equals 2. Then I need to say, hey, what's the last thing being done to y? What's the last thing you do to y here? What's the last thing you're doing to y here? What is the last thing being done to y here? So the first thing is you're multiplying by 1/6. What's the last thing being done to y? So if I said, hey, y is 2, you would do times 1/6, and then what would you do with this? Yeah, so you would have to undo that. What's the opposite of adding a negative? The opposite of adding a negative is adding a positive. So you add positive 1/3 to both sides. So now I've got 1/6 y equals 2 1/3. Now we got to think 2 1/3. Do we want to leave it as 2 1/3 right away?
No.
Why not?
Because it should be 7/3.
Okay, but why should it be 7/3? When we look here, we know what are we going to have to do to get this 1/6 off? We're multiplying by 1/6. So how do you get rid of multiplying by a fraction? You could divide by the fraction, but you don't divide by a fraction, so we want to multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal of 1/6 is 6/1. So yeah, that'll get rid of that. But 6/1, can you do 2 1/3 times 6/1? No, you can't. So we know we're gonna have y on the right side of this, but we gotta turn this into a mixed fraction. So remember, 2 times 3, and then add the 1. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 plus 1 is 7. Becomes 7/3 times 6/1. Turning a mixed fraction into a improper fraction. That look familiar? Yes? No? Some? If it doesn't look super familiar, make sure you write this down in your notes right now, where you're writing down, hey, this is how I turn a mixed fraction into an improper fraction. 2 1/3 turn into 7/3, because you're going to have to do that a lot for this section, for this chapter. Then we see, is there anything I can cancel out here?
Yeah, the 6 and the 3.
Yeah, 6 and the 3. That becomes 2, becomes 1. 2 times 7 is? 1 times 1 is 1. Y equals 14. That is your answer for that. So we can, let's see here. Yeah, I'll do one more. If you look at C on page 201, we have x plus 1.5 equals, x plus 1.5. X plus 1.5 minus 5/10 x equals 4.5. Well, again, I look at this and I say, hey, I see negative right away. Negative means I got to do something to get rid of it. So I'm adding a negative. Whoops, that's supposed to be 5/10 there. Adding a negative 5/10 x. Now I have x plus 1.5 use the what property? I can move things around. Starts with a C, ends with commutative. It's the commutative property, thank you. You can use the commutative property to shift this over here. You have x plus negative 0.5, x plus 1.5 equals, and I'm just gonna drop this 4.5 down over here. You don't, if you're doing stuff to simplify things over here, and that's one of the things that we have to do here, is that you have to notice, when do I have to simplify things on this side before I get everything over there? Because if it's not simplified on this side, there's no reason to try to get it over there in the first place. And then you guys say, hey, I've got x's here, can I combine them? Yes, I can. X plus negative 5/10 x makes what? So you have one of something and you're subtracting half of it away. If you have one of something, you subtract half of it away, then you only have half left. So you 5/10 x plus 1.5 equals 4.5. And now I gotta say, hey, how do I undo what's being done to x in the opposite order? Well, first thing that's happening is you're multiplying by 5/10. Then you're adding 1.5, so you gotta get rid of 1.5. Now you've got 5/10 x equals 3. How do I get rid of half of something? If I said, hey, you've only got half of this, you need to make it one of it. How would you get rid of that? You have half. You can think about it, hey, it's the same thing as 1/2 x. How would you get rid of 1/2? You would divide by a fraction. You can't divide by a fraction, so you multiply by the reciprocal. So reciprocal, you would say 2 over 1, or just 2. So that cancels those out. Now we have x equals 6. And again, you can go back and check it, but come on, you know right now that is the right answer. So we got guided practice 1 through 4. And after that, you can start on the assignment.